Usually when you think about a family tree, there's this expectation of neatness.
Oh, for sure. Like a well-pruned oak tree or something.
Right. You trace a branch back in time, and it splits cleanly into two. You have a parent species, it encounters a mountain range or maybe a shifting river, and it neatly divides into two distinct child species.
Yeah. It's a very clean, comforting idea.
Exactly. We like our natural history to fit into little boxes that we can just, put on a museum shelf.
We really do. I mean, we love a linear narrative, but the natural world rarely obliges.
No, it does not.
When you actually get into the DNA, especially when you step into the world of proboscidean evolution, the deep history of elephants, that neat oak tree just vanishes
It's gone.
completely. What you get instead is this tangled, chaotic mess of vines.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are taking everything you thought you knew about Earth's largest land mammals and completely dismantling it.
It's going to be a wild ride.
We're looking at some incredible new paleogenomics data out of the David Reich Lab. They've essentially run a highly advanced DNA test on the entire elephant family tree, living and dead.
Which is just a monumental task on its own.
Totally. And we're cross-referencing that with deep anatomical field data from animal welfare groups, specifically the International Fund for Animal Welfare, plus decades of cognitive behavioral science.
It is a remarkable stack of research. And what's so cool is what the DNA is telling us about their past perfectly aligns with what ethologists are seeing in their behavior today.
Yeah, it really does. By the time we finish today, you are going to realize that elephants might be experiencing the physical and social world with an emotional depth that rivals, or perhaps even exceeds our own.
Without a doubt.
And you see how their ancient, tangled family tree is completely rewriting the rules of mammalian evolution.
So to really understand their minds and bodies today, we have to start with that deep history.
Right, let's get into the DNA.
Yeah, so that brings us to the paleogenomics study from the David Reich Lab. They sequenced 14 different genomes. And we aren't just talking about the elephants you see wandering a savanna or living in a sanctuary today.
No, because sequencing a living animal is one thing, right? You take a blood sample, you run it through a machine. They sequenced extinct giants, too.
Exactly.
They looked at the woolly mammoth, the Columbian mammoth, the extinct straight-tusked elephant, and even the American mastodon. How do you even go about getting a complete genome from an animal that has been dead for tens of thousands or even millions of years?
That is the magic of paleogenomics. So DNA is a molecule, right? And over time, it degrades.
It breaks down.
Right, it gets chopped up by enzymes, degraded by water, shattered by UV radiation. So when you extract DNA from a fossilized bone or a frozen mammoth tusk, you aren't getting a clean, complete strand.
Just pieces.
Millions of tiny degraded fragments, and they're often mixed up with the DNA of bacteria that lived in the dirt.
Oh, wow. Sounds like a nightmare to sort out.
It really is. Modern supercomputers and sequencing algorithms act like the ultimate jigsaw puzzle solvers. They take these millions of shattered fragments, overlap them, and map them against the genomes of living relatives to rebuild the entire sequence.
That is just incredible. And you mentioned the mastodon. In the study, they call the American mastodon an outgroup. What does that actually mean in the context of building a family tree?
Right. An outgroup provides a genetic baseline. The mastodon diverged from the main elephant family roughly 28 to 10 million years ago.
So way, way back.
Way back. Imagine you're trying to figure out which traits in your family come from your mother's side versus your father's side.
Okay.
If you have an old photograph of a great-great-grandparent,
Yeah.
that's your outgroup, you can look at it and say, oh, that specific nose shape has been in the family since before the line split.
Ah, I see.
So by comparing the mammoth and modern elephant DNA to the ancient mastodon DNA, geneticists can see exactly where and when certain genetic mutations appeared in more recent branches. It anchors the whole timeline.
Okay, let's unpack this. They have this incredibly detailed anchored data set of 14 genomes. And here is where the historical assumption of that neat, branching evolutionary tree just gets completely overturned.
Tossed out the window.
Because for decades, paleontologists categorized extinct elephants based largely on morphology. They just looked at the bones.
Right, specifically the shape of the skulls, the ridges on the teeth, the curvature of the tusks.
Yeah.
And based on those physical shapes, scientists had placed the extinct straight-tusked elephant, which roamed Europe and Asia and went extinct maybe 35,000 years ago, right next to the modern Asian elephant on the family tree.
Because they looked similar.
Exactly. They had very similar skull structure, so the assumption was that they were sister species.
Which, I mean, seems entirely logical. If you only have bones, you compare the bones.
Yeah.
But the DNA says something completely different.
Radically different. The genomic data proves that the straight-tusked elephant isn't just a sister to the Asian elephant. It is a massive genetic mashup.
A mashup.
Yeah, it's a hybrid of 3 entirely distinct lineages.
I want to make sure I'm wrapping my head around this. How exactly does that break down?
So the majority of the straight-tusked elephant's ancestry comes from a basal African ancestor, like a very ancient lineage related to the common ancestor of all modern African elephant.
Okay.
But then it contains a massive genetic contribution, specifically 35 to 39% of its ancestry from the West African forest elephant.
Wait, really? Almost 40%?
Yeah. And as if bridging those two wasn't enough, about 6 to 10% of its DNA comes from the woolly mammoth.
That is wild. You have an animal walking around Europe with tusks that are totally straight, carrying a skull that looks like an Asian elephant, but its actual genetic code is this chaotic blend of ancient African ancestors, West African forest elephants, and woolly mammoths.
It perfectly illustrates why morphology, just looking at the shape of an animal, can be so deceptive. Because an animal's skull shape might adapt to a specific diet, like chewing a certain type of tough grass, very quickly in evolutionary terms. That physical adaptation can easily mask the true, deep genetic origins of the animal. But DNA doesn't lie. It retains the deep history of interbreeding.
So instead of a neat family tree where a species splits and never interacts again, this feels more like, well, like open source software code or something.
I like that.
Right. You have different populations branching off, but instead of staying isolated, they're like a highly active group chat where everyone is constantly swapping genetic secrets to patch vulnerabilities and adapt to new environments.
That is a fantastic analogy. They are swapping genetic code to survive.
Yeah.
And the straight-tusked elephant wasn't an anomaly either.
No.
No. The Reich Lab study also found that Columbian mammoths and woolly mammoths were actively interbreeding in North America.
But how did that work geographically? Because, you know, we picture woolly mammoths in the freezing Arctic and Columbian mammoths further south, right?
Yeah. Precisely. They found what we call a north-south genetic cline. The Columbian mammoth, which preferred more temperate southern environments, was actively introgressing, meaning it was transferring genetic information into the populations of the cold-adapted woolly mammoths further north.
Right at the boundary where they met.
Exactly, right where their territories overlapped.
So why should you care that mammoths and straight-tusked elephants were crossing genetic boundaries hundreds of thousands of years ago? To me, it fundamentally changes how we view species purity.
Absolutely.
If nature's greatest survivors, these highly adaptable megafauna, are essentially genetic mutts, it forces a complete rethink of what a species actually is.
It really does. It proves that hybridization is likely the norm in mammalian evolution, not some weird mistake. Gene flow allows populations to acquire new, potentially advantageous traits incredibly quickly, leading to these highly adaptable admixed species.
But nature loves a contradiction. While we have mammoths and straight-tusked elephants acting like open-source genetic networks sharing DNA across continents, we have another group experiencing the exact opposite extreme. We have this deep, profound isolation in Africa.
Yes, the genomes present this fascinating duality, because for a very long time, wildlife biology lumped the African forest elephant and the African savanna elephant together as a single species. They were just, the African elephant.
But the DNA shatters that entirely.
It absolutely does. The genomic data proves that the African forest elephant, Loxodonta cyclotis, and the African savanna elephant, Loxodonta africana, diverged genetically about 5 to 2 million years ago.
Wow.
To put that in perspective, humans and chimpanzees diverged roughly 6 to 8 million years ago. So the evolutionary distance between a forest elephant and a savanna elephant is almost as vast as the distance between us and a chimp.
And the study points out that not only did they split millions of years ago, but they have been almost completely isolated from each other for roughly 500,000 years. The genomes they sequenced showed no detectable recent gene flow between them.
None.
How does that isolation actually show up in the DNA?
We look at something called heterozygosity, which is a measure of genetic diversity. The data shows that forest elephants have the highest genetic diversity of all living and extinct elephantids.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Asian elephants and mammoths sit somewhere in the middle. But the savanna elephants, the ones we picture roaming in huge herds on the plains, have the lowest genetic diversity.
Why is that? I mean, you'd think the animal with the vast open continent to roam would have a wildly diverse gene pool.
It is counterintuitive, but researchers hypothesize it could be tied to ancient ecological competition. Hundreds of thousands of years ago, another giant elephant species, Paleoloxodon rechi, dominated the African savannas.
So they had competition.
Huge competition. It's highly probable that the ancestors of modern savanna elephants were outcompeted and pushed into marginal, less ideal habitats, which caused a population crash, a genetic bottleneck.
Right, which wipes out a lot of the genetic variety.
Exactly. Even after they recovered and took over the savanna, that ancient bottleneck permanently reduced their genetic diversity. It could also be driven by extreme male-male competition, where only a handful of massive dominant bulls get to pass on their genes, effectively shrinking the gene pool generation after generation.
Okay, that makes sense. And the isolation wasn't just between the savanna and the forest. The study found a deep split within the forest elephants themselves, right?
Yes. West African forest elephants and Central African forest elephants diverged from each other between 609,000 and 463,000 years ago.
What mechanism actually drives that kind of deep isolation on a single continent? We aren't talking about a new ocean forming.
What's fascinating here is it comes down to fluctuating climates. Over the last million years, the Earth has gone through severe glacial and interglacial periods.
Ice age it.
Right. Now, in Africa, an ice age doesn't mean glaciers covering the continent. It means severe cooling and drying. During those periods, the massive African rainforests would shrink and contract into tiny, isolated refuges, separated by vast expansions of arid grassland.
So populations of forest elephants get physically trapped in these little isolated pockets of jungle for hundreds of thousands of years. They can't cross the arid grassland to reach each other, so they evolve on entirely separate tracks.
Precisely. And this deep genetic isolation provides rigorous scientific justification for classifying the forest and savanna elephants as two entirely separate species under the biological species concept.
Which basically says if they don't breed naturally, they're separate.
Exactly. It defines a species as a population of organisms that can interbreed and produce fertile offspring, but are reproductively isolated from other groups.
Hold on, though. I have to push back on this.
Okay, go for it.
If they've been totally isolated for 500,000 years, why are there videos and field reports of savanna and forest elephants breeding right now in places where their territories overlap, like in Central Africa? How do those two facts coexist?
It's a great question, and it's where we have to differentiate between localized contact zones and species-wide introgression.
Yeah.
Yes, today, where the savanna meets the forest, individuals of the two species do occasionally meet and breed, and they do produce fertile offspring.
Okay, so gene flow is happening.
Locally, yes. But, and this is the critical mechanism, those hybrid genes aren't spreading back into the broader populations.
Oh, I see.
Right? A hybrid elephant living on the edge of the forest isn't migrating deep into the dense Congo Basin to breed with pure forest elephants, nor is it trekking 1,000 miles across the open Serengeti to breed with pure savanna elephants. The gene flow gets stuck right at the border.
It just hovers there.
Exactly. So when you sequence a representative forest elephant from deep in the jungle and a savanna elephant from deep in the plains, their genomes show 500,000 years of pure isolation. The local edge case hybridization hasn't erased their distinct evolutionary histories.
That makes so much sense. It's like two distinct rivers that briefly touch and mix at one specific bend, but the main currents of both rivers remain entirely separate.
Perfect way to put it.
So we have this invisible, deep genetic divide that kept them apart for 500,000 years. If you isolate two populations for that long in wildly different environments, those genetic differences are going to start showing up in their physical hardware. If we pull from the IFAW data, the anatomical differences are staggering. Let's look at the biomechanics of this.
The physical adaptations are profound. Let's start with pure mass. The African savanna elephant is the largest land mammal on Earth. They grow up to 4 meters tall and weigh around 6,100 kilograms.
That's over 13,000 pounds. And they have this very distinct concave back. It dips down in the middle, whereas Asian elephants are significantly smaller, and they have a convex back rounding upwards, along with a really distinct twin-domed head. What is the engineering behind those shapes? Why does a heavier animal need a concave back?
It comes down to suspension bridge mechanics and muscle attachment. The African savanna elephant is carrying an immense amount of weight in its gut. digesting huge quantities of tough savanna grasses.
Right.
A concave back allows the heavy gut to be suspended efficiently between the massive pillars of the front and hind legs, stabilizing the center of gravity on open plains.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and the Asian elephant, being smaller and navigating dense forests, relies on a more convex, rounded spine for agility, and that twin-domed head on the Asian elephant. That provides massive surface area for the attachment of the incredibly powerful neck muscles required to maneuver and uproot vegetation in a thick jungle environment.
It's pure architectural adaptation. And then you have the ears.
The ears are perhaps the most famous differentiator. African elephants have massive ears, up to 1.8 meters long, shaped remarkably like the continent of Africa itself.
Which is always such a cool fact.
It is. Asian elephants have much smaller, rounder ears.
But the ears aren't just for hearing better, right? It's a thermoregulation system.
Exactly. Elephants lack the sweat glands to cool down the way humans do. In the blazing heat of the African savanna, those massive ears act as a high-powered radiator system. The ears are heavily vascularized, meaning they're packed with a dense network of blood vessels.
So when they flap them?
When the elephant flaps them, it creates a breeze across the thin skin, cooling the blood before it circulates back into the massive body core. It can lower their blood temperature by several degrees. The Asian elephant, evolving mostly in the dappled, cooler shade of dense forests, simply didn't face the same thermal stress and didn't need a radiator of that magnitude.
What about the trunk? We know it's an incredible tool, but how different is it between the species?
The trunk is a marvel of biomechanics. It is essentially the upper lip and nose fused together, containing roughly 40,000 muscles.
Wait, 40,000?
Yes, to put that in perspective, the entire human body only has about 600 muscles.
That is absurd.
African elephants have two fleshy protrusions at the tip of their trunk, what we call fingers. They use them in a pinching motion, like tweezers, to pick up small objects. Asian elephants only have one finger on the top lip, so they tend to grasp things by wrapping the entire end of the trunk around the object.
African elephants also have far more whiskers on the end of their trunk, giving them heightened tactile sensitivity. But here's where it gets really interesting. The adaptation that blew my mind the most is the skin. African elephants are famously wrinkly, while Asian elephants have much smoother skin, often with those pinkish, depigmented freckles on their faces. I always thought wrinkles were just a byproduct of having thick, loose skin.
Not at all. The evolution of wrinkles in African elephants isn't just cosmetic. It's a profound, life-saving physiological adaptation. Researchers analyzed the microscopic structure of those wrinkles. They are a network of intricate crevices that allow the skin to retain 5 to 10 times more water than a smooth surface would.
So it's essentially a biological, wearable hydration pack and a radiator system combined.
Exactly. When an African elephant bathes in water or sprays itself with mud, those deep microvalleys trap the moisture against the skin. Because it's trapped in the crevices, the water evaporates very slowly over hours, providing continuous cooling as they walk across the arid bait savanna.
And the Asian elephant just doesn't need that.
Right, an Asian elephant living in a humid, wet, shaded forest didn't face that intense evolutionary pressure to trap moisture on its skin, hence the smoother texture.
It's brilliant. Every millimeter of their body is engineered for their specific environment. But there is one anatomical feature that brings us to a really sobering reality: the tusks. Tusks are just elongated incisor teeth used for digging, stripping tree bark, and defense. Historically, in African elephants, both males and females grew tusks. But the IFAW data highlights that tusklessness is evolving rapidly in African populations.
Yeah, this is where we see human interference overriding millions of years of natural selection.
Which is terrifying.
It is. In any natural elephant population, a very small percentage of females are born naturally tuskless due to a rare genetic mutation. But because of intense, relentless ivory poaching over the last century, humans have artificially altered their evolutionary trajectory. Poachers target the elephants with the largest tusks. The elephants without tusks are ignored and spared.
So the poachers are essentially acting as an artificial predator, wiping out the genes for large tusks, leaving only the tuskless elephants to survive and pass on their DNA. How long does it take for human-driven pressures to outpace millions of years of anatomical evolution?
Shockingly fast. We are watching human behavior rapidly overwrite deep evolution in the blink of an eye. In some populations, such as in Mozambique's Gorongosa National Park, the proportion of tuskless females skyrocketed from about 18% to over 50% in just a few decades.
Over 50%, that's drastic.
And it perfectly corresponded to a period of intense civil war and rampant poaching to fund the conflict.
It is a dark testament to how much pressure we exert on them. We've seen their deep genetic history, we've broken down the biomechanics of their physical adaptations, but to really grasp what an elephant is, we need to go inside. We need to look at the hardware of their minds.
And this is where the science allows us to start truly understanding the subjective lived experience of being an elephant.
If we look at the raw neurological specs, their brain is massive. We're talking roughly 5 kilograms or 11 pounds. That is 4 times the size of a human brain, making it the heaviest brain of any terrestrial animal. And the neuron count is staggering.
It really is. They possess roughly 257 billion neurons.
Wait, 257 billion? That's triple what a human has, right?
Exactly. But you have to look closely at the architecture of the brain, at how those neurons are allocated. While they have 3 times the overall neurons we do, only about 1/3 of the neurons found in a human's cerebral cortex are present in the elephant's cerebral cortex.
And the cerebral cortex in humans is what we typically associate with higher level analytical processing, complex reasoning, language, things like that. So they have fewer neurons there, but they heavily outpace us in a different structure.
Yes. Where they absolutely dominate is the hippocampus. In an elephant, the hippocampus is highly convoluted, meaning it has a massive amount of folds to increase surface area, and it is massively oversized compared to other mammals. It takes up about 0.7% of their central brain structures.
To give you context, a human's hippocampus takes up about 0.5%, and a highly intelligent bottlenose dolphin's is only 0.1%. What exactly does the hippocampus do?
The hippocampus is essentially the brain's control center for processing emotion, for consolidating memory, and for spatial navigation.
And there's another fascinating piece of hardware in there, right? Spindle neurons, also known as von Economo neurons. What exactly is a spindle neuron?
Spindle neurons are large, specialized brain cells shaped, as the name implies, like spindles. Their primary function is to allow for incredibly rapid communication across relatively large distances within a massive brain.
Like a fast track for signal.
Exactly. They act like high-speed fiber optic cables connecting different emotional and cognitive centers. For a long time, we thought only humans and great apes had them, and they are strongly linked to intelligent behavior, social awareness, empathy, and gut feelings. But then we found them in cetaceans, whales, and dolphins. And now we found them in high densities in elephants.
So it's a textbook example of convergent evolution. 3 entirely different branches of the mammalian tree, primates, cetaceans, and elephants, all independently evolved this specific type of high-speed brain cell because they all needed to manage incredibly complex social and emotional lives.
Exactly. Nature solved the same problem 3 different ways using the exact same cellular hardware.
And the way their brain develops after birth is also crucial here. Most mammals, like a deer or a horse, are born with brains that are already about 90% of their adult weight. They drop to the ground and rely heavily on hardwired instinct to run and survive immediately.
Right.
Humans are born with brains at about 28% of their adult weight, which is why human babies are completely helpless and need years of parental teaching just to learn how to walk and eat. Chimpanzees are born at 54%. Where do elephants land?
Elephants are born with a brain that is only 35% of its adult weight.
That is incredibly close to human development.
The implications of that are profound. Being born with a brain that is only 35% developed means that an elephant's behavior is not primarily driven by innate, hardwired instinct. It is driven by post-birth learning.
They have to figure it all out.
A baby elephant has a massive childhood learning curve. It has to be actively taught by its mother and aunts how to articulate the 40,000 muscles in its trunk. It has to be taught which plants are medicinal and which are toxic. It has to learn the complex social hierarchy, and it has to memorize the vast geographic map of water sources in its environment.
So what does this all mean? If we synthesize all of this, if they have triple our neurons but fewer in the cortex and way more in the hippocampus, and they have these high-speed empathy neurons, does that mean their intelligence isn't necessarily analytical like human math, but rather a profoundly deep emotional and spatial intelligence?
That is the leading hypothesis. Because their hippocampus is so immense and folded, their subjective experience of memory and emotion is likely incredibly vivid, perhaps more vivid than our own. And this provides a biological, structural explanation for something field researchers have observed for decades. Elephants suffering from psychological flashbacks and displaying symptoms functionally identical to post-traumatic stress disorder.
Because their brains are literally built to remember and feel with an intensity that outstrips our own.
Yes. When an elephant witnesses a highly traumatic event, like its mother being gunned down by poachers, That memory is burned into this massive hippocampal structure. It isn't just a fleeting animal fear. It is a complex, enduring psychological scar that alters their behavior for the rest of their lives.
Which means we can't look at their brain in isolation. You can't have biological hardware built for that kind of profound emotional depth without it completely shaping how they live and interact with each other. The ethology, the study of their behavior in the wild, perfectly mirrors what we see in the neurology.
Their societal structure is entirely built around those immense emotional capacities.
Yeah.
Elephant society is strictly matriarchal. It is a tightly knit, multi-generational sisterhood. African savanna herds can reach up to 70 individuals, all related females and their offspring, led by the oldest, most experienced female, the matriarch.
And what about Asian elephants?
Asian elephant herds tend to be a bit smaller and more fluid, maybe 5 to 15 related females that might splinter into smaller groups and reunite depending on food availability.
And what happens to the males?
When males reach sexual maturity, they leave the matriarchal herd. African males will often form temporary, loose bachelor herds to learn social cues and sparring techniques from older bulls, while Asian males tend to be a bit more solitary. But within those core female families, the bonds are practically unbreakable.
And those bonds extend into remarkable acts of altruism. We define altruism as acting to help another individual at a cost or risk to oneself without expecting a reward. And the sources detail elephants showing this not just within their families, but across entirely different species barriers.
The cross-species empathy is astonishing.
There's this documented case in India of a working elephant that was trained to lower heavy logs into pre-dug holes for construction. At one specific hole, the elephant absolutely refused to lower the log, despite the increasingly angry commands of the mahout, the human trainer.
Right.
Finally, the trainer climbed down from the elephant to look into the hole and found a dog sleeping at the bottom. The elephant refused to crush the dog. It stood there, holding the heavy log, and waited until the dog woke up and ran away, before finally lowering it.
That is a complex cognitive sequence. It recognized the vulnerability of a completely different, unrelated living creature, anticipated the fatal consequence of dropping the log, and chose to protect the dog, actively disobeying a trained command to do so.
And there's another story, documented by researcher Joyce Poole, about a matriarch who encountered a human herdsman near a camel herd. The elephant, perceiving a threat to her family, charged and knocked the man over, breaking his leg with her trunk.
Which is terrifying.
Absolutely. But then, realizing he was incapacitated and no longer a threat, she didn't finish him off. Instead, she used her trunk to gently drag him under the shade of a nearby tree. She stood guard over him for the entire day, gently touching him with her trunk, until a search party arrived in a truck and scared her off. She broke his leg defensively, but then showed compassion for his helplessness.
If we route this back to the neurology, the massive hippocampus and those spindle neurons are directly driving this empathy. A purely instinctual animal would have either ignored the dog or crushed it without a thought, and would have either killed the herdsman or immediately fled. The elephant assessed the situation, recognized the stress, and fundamentally altered its behavior to provide care.
But I think the most overwhelming evidence of their emotional depth revolves around their reaction to death. Elephants are one of the very few species on Earth, alongside human beings and Neanderthals, that possess what we can legitimately call death rituals.
It's one of the most chilling and beautiful behaviors to witness in the wild. When an elephant encounters the bones of another elephant, even if it's an animal they never knew that died years ago, they stop. The entire herd becomes completely silent.
Total silence.
Yes. They use their highly sensitive trunks and the tactile pads of their feet to gently touch and inspect the bones, paying special attention to the skull and the tusks.
It's as if they're reading the remains, trying to recognize the individual. And when a member of their own family dies, the reaction is just heartbreaking. Cynthia Moss, who is one of the greatest elephant researchers of our time, documented the story of a young female named Tina who was shot by poachers. As Tina's knees buckled from the gunshot, her mother, the matriarch Teresia, and another female named Trista rushed to her sides. They literally leaned their immense weight against her, trying to keep her standing.
The desperation in that moment is palpable.
Yeah.
They understand what is happening.
When Tina finally fell and died, they didn't leave. They tried to put grass in her mouth to wake her up. And then Teresia, the mother, put her tusks under Tina's body and tried with all her might to lift her dead daughter. She pushed so hard with so much force that she snapped her own right tusk completely off, right up to the lip, exposing the massive nerve cavity.
The physical pain of breaking a tusk at the nerve would have been excruciating. But the physical pain was entirely eclipsed by the psychological grief.
Eventually, realizing she was gone, the family began to bury Tina. They kicked dirt over her body and pulled branches and leaves from surrounding trees to cover her, and then they stood vigil over her grave through the entire night.
And this behavior isn't restricted to their own species. There are numerous accounts of elephants burying humans who are either dead or sometimes just sleeping deeply under a tree. They cover them with branches and leaves in the exact same manner.
And there's the incredible account from George Adamson, the famous game warden in Kenya. He had to shoot a rogue bull elephant that was destroying local gardens. He gave the meat to a local tribe and dragged the remaining carcass half a mile away. That night, the other elephants from the herd found the remains. They took the shoulder blade and the leg bone of the butchered bull, carried them half a mile back, and deposited the bones in the exact spot where the elephant had been killed.
They returned his remains to the site of his death. Think about the mechanics of that action. It implies a deep spatial memory, again, the hippocampus at work, and a profound sense of honoring the dead.
You know, it's easy for us to look at an animal and project our own feelings onto it. That's called anthropomorphism. And in science, that's usually considered a cardinal sin. You don't assume a dog feels guilty just because it looks sad. But considering their specific brain structure, that massive hippocampus packed with empathy neurons, is it possible that their experience of grief is actually more intense than ours? We might not be anthropomorphizing them. We might be massively underestimating them.
It is a highly plausible scientific hypothesis. If the biological hardware for emotion and memory is structurally larger and more complex in an elephant than in a human, it stands to reason that the software running on it, the subjective internal experience of grief, joy, and empathy, might be of an intensity we can barely comprehend.
That is a staggering thought, but it begs a question. We've established this immense emotional intelligence, but what about their cognitive reasoning, their problem solving? Are they smart in a way we traditionally measure analytical intelligence?
The cognitive science data is incredibly rich, and it proves they excel across a wide range of domains: mathematics, physical tool use, linguistics, and self-awareness.
Let's start with math, because this blew my mind. Dr. Naoko Iri at Tokyo University conducted a study with Asian elephants to test their arithmetic skills. And this wasn't just a basic visual test of distinguishing a big pile of 10 apples from a small pile of 2. This involved keeping a running mental tally.
Right. They would drop varying numbers of apples into 2 separate buckets, one by one, obscuring the total.
So they dropped 3 apples in the left bucket, then 2 in the right, then 4 in the left. The elephants had to keep track of the hidden totals in their heads for both buckets, do the addition, and then choose the bucket with the most apples. An Asian elephant named Asha picked the fuller bucket 87% of the time. When humans were given the exact same visual test, they only scored 67%. Asha the elephant beat adult humans at mental addition.
That requires high-level short-term working memory and a clear conceptual understanding of quantitative values. It's not just guessing, it's computation.
Then there is tool use and understanding physics. We know they use branches to swat flies, which is basic tool use. But they also understand the physical properties of materials. To prevent their drinking water from evaporating in the heat, they will chew up tree bark to create a spongy ball, plug the water hole with it, and cover it with sand. They essentially manufacture a stopper that they can remove later.
That shows an understanding of future needs, evaporation, and material manipulation.
And they apply this to escaping, too. At Marine World Africa in the 1970s, an Asian elephant named Bandula was shackled using a complex Brummel hook. This isn't a simple padlock. A Brummel hook is a specialized piece of sailing hardware that only opens if 2 opposite points are perfectly aligned and slid together in a very specific motion.
Yeah, you have to really understand how the pieces fit together.
Bandula figured it out. She would quietly fiddle with the hook using her trunk until she aligned the points, slid it apart, and freed herself. And then, amazingly, she would go around and unlock the shackles of the other elephants.
The detail about her doing it quietly is key here. Captive elephants often show an element of active deception. They wait until the human keepers are not looking to execute their escapes. That means they understand visual fields and human attention. They have a theory of mind regarding their captors.
And in the wild, this problem-solving turns into literal mining. There's a place called Kidum Cave in Kenya. Elephants have figured out that deep inside this pitch-black cave, the rock walls contain cation-rich zeolites.
Now, to explain zeolites, herbivores eating a purely plant-based diet in the savanna often face a severe sodium deficiency. Sodium is physiologically critical Without it, the action potentials in their neurons and muscles can't fire properly. The zeolites in this cave were essentially mineral salts.
So these massive animals navigate deep into a totally dark cave, use their tusks to literally mine the rock, breaking off chunks to eat for the sodium. They obviously don't know the chemical formula for salt, but they know their bodies need it, and they pass the geographic knowledge of this cave down through generations. It's a cultural transmission of mining techniques.
Which brings us to linguistics and mimicry. Elephants have a natural vocal range of rumbles, trumpets, and roars. But they're also capable of vocal learning, which is exceedingly rare in mammals outside of humans, bats, and cetaceans.
The examples of mimicry are almost surreal. There was an orphaned elephant named Malaika who learned to perfectly mimic the mechanical sound of the trucks driving past her enclosure. An African elephant named Calimero, who was housed in a Swiss zoo but surrounded by Asian elephants, stopped making his natural deep African rumbles and learned to mimic the high-pitched chirps of his Asian counterparts so he could fit in with the herd.
He culturally assimilated through vocal learning.
And then there's Kosik, an Indian elephant in South Korea. Kosik learned to physically articulate 5 distinct Korean words, including yes, no, sit, and lie down. Now, an elephant's vocal tract isn't shaped for human vowels, so Kosik figured out that if he put his trunk inside his own mouth and manipulated it while exhaling, he could perfectly imitate the frequency and pitch of human speech.
Think about the mechanical ingenuity of that. He essentially used his trunk as a hand to modify his vocal instrument. It displays an incredible motivation to bridge the communication gap with his human keepers.
And they don't just mimic sound, they can understand syntax and semantics. A trainer named Harry Peachy worked with an elephant named Coco. If keepers needed help moving a stubborn female elephant to a different enclosure, they would say the female's name followed by the specific command transfer, like, Connie, transfer.
Right.
Coco the elephant learned the syntactic structure of this command. If the keepers then said to him, Coco, give me a hand, Coco would walk over and physically coerce the stubborn female into transferring. He understood the specific action being requested within the context of the sentence.
But the pinnacle of cognitive testing, the gold standard for higher intelligence, is the mirror test for self-awareness.
Right. If you put a dog or a cat in front of a mirror, they think it's another animal. They bark at it or look behind the glass. But researchers at the Bronx Zoo put a 2.5-meter mirror in the enclosure of Asian elephants. The elephants first inspected the mirror, looked behind it, and then started using it to inspect parts of their own bodies they couldn't normally see, like the inside of their mouths.
Which is the first stage of mirror self-recognition.
The researchers then painted a visible X on the forehead of an elephant named Happy, and a second, invisible X made of colorless, odorless paint on the other side of her head.
That invisible X is a crucial control mechanism. It ensures the elephant isn't just reacting to the smell of the paint or the tactile feeling of it drying on their skin.
When Happy looked in the mirror, she immediately brought her trunk up and repeatedly touched the visible painted X on her own head. She didn't touch the mirror, she touched herself.
By passing this test, elephants joined a highly exclusive club of self-aware beings. Humans, great apes, bottlenose dolphins, and Eurasian magpies. It proves they have a concept of self distinct from others.
Now, in the interest of a truly comprehensive deep dive, we have to look at the skepticism. Not every scientist is convinced they are geniuses. Some point to older experiments that paint a different picture. In the 1950s, a researcher used a Thorndike-style discrimination task.
A Thorndike box basically tests if an animal can learn a specific sequence of actions to get a reward. They presented an Asian elephant with 2 visual choices, rewarding the correct one with food. It took the elephant 330 trials over several days to consistently choose the right one.
And in another experiment in Myanmar, researchers trained elephants to remove a lid from a bucket to get a treat. Then they put the treat in the bucket, but left the lid on the ground next to it so the bucket was already open. The elephant still picked up the lid and moved it before taking the food. The skeptical scientists argue that if the elephant truly understood cause and effect, it would see the open bucket, ignore the lid entirely, and just grab the food. Because they moved the lid anyway, skeptics argue they learn by mindless mechanical repetition, not by true causal reasoning.
Right, that's the counter-argument.
But honestly, I look at that and I don't see stupidity, I see compliance. If an elephant has spent its whole life in a logging camp, trained by humans to perform specific sequences of actions on command, maybe it sees the lid on the ground and thinks, well, the human wants me to move the lid first, so I'll be polite and play along.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that is a very astute observation. When assessing animal intelligence, The context of the test matters immensely. A bucket test designed to measure the cognition of a dog or a primate might completely fail to capture the cognition of an elephant.
Think about the cooperative string pulling tasks we read about. They set up a heavy log with a treat on it, attached to a rope strung through a pulley. To pull it close enough to eat, two elephants have to pull both ends of the rope at the exact same time. If one pulls alone, the rope just unspools through the pulley and they get nothing. The elephants figured it out immediately. They would wait for their partner to arrive before pulling. It's like humans playing an escape room. It requires timing, trust, shared intent, and understanding of the physics of the rope. If an animal can unlock a complex Brummel shackle and sneak out when humans aren't looking, maybe the reason they fail a human-designed visual bucket test isn't because they're slow. Maybe it's because the test itself is flawed, or the elephant just doesn't care about the bucket.
It highlights the danger of measuring a wildly different intelligence using a human yardstick. We have to test them on terms that make sense to their ecology, their massive bodies, and their complex social structure.
Which really brings us to the final, most crucial part of our journey today. Because understanding their intelligence isn't just an academic exercise, it carries profound moral weight.
The situation on the ground is dire. All three species of elephant are in serious danger. The IUCN Red List classifies the African savanna elephant and the Asian elephant as endangered. And the African forest elephant, which we learned earlier is completely genetically distinct and highly diverse, is classified as critically endangered.
They are facing a barrage of threats: ivory poaching, habitat fragmentation, and climate change. And this is where organizations like IFAW are doing critical work. They have a project in Africa called Room to Roam. The goal is to reconnect 10 critical, fragmented landscapes. They're trying to secure corridors so these massive herds, containing upwards of 10,000 elephants, have the space to migrate, find water, and maintain that genetic diversity we talked about.
And they're also tackling the tragedy of orphaned elephants. In Zimbabwe and Zambia, IFAW supports elephant nurseries. When a mother is poached or dies in a drought, the calf is completely helpless. Without the mother's milk and the protection of the herd, they cannot survive, especially given that slow-developing brain we discussed. These nurseries rehabilitate them, providing the intense long-term care and teaching that they require, with the ultimate goal of releasing them back into wild herds.
And they are working in Asia, too. In China, the Asian Elephant Protection Project is focused on mitigating human-elephant conflict. As habitats shrink, elephants raid crops, leading to deadly encounters. IFAW uses early warning systems and a network of community rangers to track elephant movements and keep both the humans and the elephants safe, while also helping locals find alternative, eco-friendly livelihoods.
It's a holistic approach to conservation, but there is a highly debated aspect to wildlife management that we must address: the debate over culling.
Right. In certain protected areas, like South Africa's Kruger National Park, elephant populations can sometimes grow to the point where they threaten the local biodiversity. Because they eat so much and knock down trees, they can radically alter the landscape, affecting other species that rely on the forest cover. Historically, park management has used culling in the targeted killing of entire elephant families as a population control measure.
It is a fiercely debated topic within conservation. Proponents argue it is a necessary, albeit tragic, ecological management tool to prevent the collapse of the entire ecosystem. But animal rights advocates and many conservationists argue that given the overwhelming evidence of their cognitive abilities, culling is biologically and psychologically devastating.
So why should you, the listener, care about this debate? If the genomic data proves how deep and unique their evolutionary history is, and the cognitive data proves these animals have a sense of self, the ability to do math, and the capacity for deep grief and PTSD, does our moral obligation shift? Does it move from merely preserving biodiversity to protecting conscious individuals? If they are aware they're alive, if they mourn their dead, how does that reframe the reality of culling a family?
It forces us to synthesize everything we've discussed today. Because we know from the David Reich Lab data how unique these separate species are. Conservation cannot be a one-size-fits-all approach. Saving a forest elephant is biologically, genetically, and culturally different from saving a savanna elephant. And because we know from the cognitive data how self-aware they are, any management strategy must reckon with the psychological trauma inflicted on the survivors.
It's a heavy, profound responsibility. We are sharing the planet with a creature that feels and thinks in ways that are startlingly close to our own. We have covered immense ground today. We started by untangling a messy, hybridized DNA web involving mammoths and straight-tusked anomalies. We explored the vast physical differences driven by millions of years of isolation across African savannas and jungles. We looked at a brain built not for cold logic, but for intense emotional and spatial memory. And we witnessed their genius, their math skills, their tool use, and their profound rituals of grief.
We have dismantled the simple picture of the elephant and
Uh,
reconstructed it as a complex, highly evolved, self-aware being.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final, awe-inspiring concept to mull over. We learned earlier that elephants communicate using low-frequency seismic vibrations, sending rumbles through the ground that travel for miles, which they pick up through the sensitive pads of their feet and their trunks.
That's incredible.
Now, combine that physical ability with their massive hippocampus, their deep multi-generational memory, and their complex social bonds. Could it be that right now, beneath our feet, vibrating through the earth itself, elephants are broadcasting an ancient seismic oral history? Could they be sharing a rich cultural narrative of hidden water sources, lost family members, and epic journeys of survival? A massive planet-wide conversation that we humans, with our tiny ears and frantic lives, are completely oblivious to.
It is entirely possible. They are singing the history of the world into the ground.
Something to think about the next time you feel the earth vibrate. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep your mind open and stay wildly curious.